welcome back to Stories and Stones, a channel where we talk about creepy stuff, and the creep factor is all the way up for this one, okay? It's a love story, but wait, it's a love story that is gonna make you feel really grossed out and uncomfortable. So we're gonna start with the man we will be calling Carl Tanzler. He's gone through a few different names throughout his life, but we're just gonna go with Carl. He was born as either Carl Tanzler or George Carl Tanzler on February 8th, 1877 in Dresden, Germany. Carl grew up in the German Empire, but at some point he wound up in Australia before the start of World War I. Around 1920, Carl returned to Germany, married a woman named Doris Schaefer, and had two daughters, Aisha and Clarissa. In 1926, Carl left his wife and two daughters behind and emigrated to the United States, settling in Zephyrhills, Florida, because he already had a sister that was living there. He did send for his wife and daughters once he got settled there and got a home for them. The next year, in 1927, Carl took a job as a radiology technician at the U.S. Marine Hospital in Key West, leaving his family behind in Zephyrhills. He didn't bring them with him this time. Note that Zephyrhills is quite a distance from Key West. Make of that what you will. During his childhood in Germany and continuing on throughout his adult life, Carl claimed to have been visited by visions of a dead supposed ancestor of his called Countess Anna Constantia von Cossel. And this countess revealed the face of his true love to him. And she was this true love, supposedly this exotic, dark-haired woman. Make a note of that. On April 22nd, 1930, Carl was, working his usual shift at the hospital in Key West when a 21-year-old woman named Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos was brought in by her mother. Maria Elena was a Cuban-American woman, the daughter of a local cigar maker. She had two sisters, and by all accounts was viewed as a local beauty with many admirers around town. Carl immediately recognized her as the beautiful dark-haired woman that had been revealed to him in his lifelong visions. Thus began Carl's unhealthy obsession with Maria Elena. When she was diagnosed with tuberculosis, Carl convinced her family that he knew some medical techniques that could help her. And keep in mind that at this time, tuberculosis was almost always fatal. Carl attempted to treat and cure Maria Elena with a variety of medicines, as well as X-ray and electrical equipment, and all these things were brought into the Hoyos' home. He was working on her there. Was he still going to his job at the hospital? I don't know. But anyway, he was at the house a lot, trying to treat her, cure her, and just stare at her in a really disturbing way. I assume I made that part up, but he probably did that. Carl also showered Maria Elena with gifts of jewelry and clothing and allegedly professed his love to her, but there is no evidence that Maria Elena reciprocated this affection. Now, none of Carl's cures worked, of course, and Maria Elena succumbed to the disease, dying on October 25th, 1931. Carl paid for her funeral and commissioned the construction of a above-ground mausoleum in the Key West Cemetery that he started to go visit every night. He reportedly said that Maria Elena's spirit would come to him when he would sit by her grave and serenade her with a Spanish song. He also said that she would often tell him to come take her from her grave. I don't think she said that, Carl. If she was going to say anything, I think she would have said, "Leave me alone, you creeper." Anyway, one warm Florida evening in April 1933, Carl removed Maria Elena's body from the mausoleum and took it to his home, pulling it through the cemetery on a toy wagon. I don't think it was the same wagon that most of us had as kids, like the plastic one. But you can picture it that way if you want. Naturally, her body was starting to decompose, and Carl used piano wire and attached it to the bones to try to hold the corpse together, and he had glass eyes that he fit into her face. As the skin decomposed, Carl replaced it with silk cloth that he had soaked in wax and plaster of Paris. As further decomposition caused hair loss, Carl made a wig from hair that he had previously obtained from Maria Elena's mother. Why she had the hair and why she gave it to him, who knows? Choose your own adventure. I know that in Victorian times they made mourning jewelry out of the deceased person's hair, but I don't know if that was a thing in 1930s Florida. So, moving on. Carl filled the corpse's abdominal and chest cavity with rags to help it hold its original form. I'm kind of slouching, aren't I? I'm tired. You okay, George? All right. So, he put this, he stuffed it with rags and stuff to make it hold a body shape, because you gotta imagine, actually don't imagine how much it had decomposed at this point. He then dressed the body in, dresses, stockings, jewelry, and gloves, and kept the body in his bed. We'll get to that in a minute. So he had taken Maria Elena's body home in 1933. 7 years later, in October of 1940, Maria Elena's sister, Florinda, had heard rumors of Carl keeping her sister's disinterred body at his home, and she stopped by to confront him. Either she marched right in, or Carl confessed, or the police showed up. Any way that it happened, Carl's secret was discovered and he was arrested. After a preliminary hearing on October 9th, 1940, at the Monroe County Courthouse in Key West, Carl was held to answer on the charge, but the case was eventually dropped, and he was released, as the statute of limitations for the crime had expired. So, if you steal a corpse from the cemetery, just make sure you don't get caught for several years. Apparently it's just fine. The facts underlying the case and the preliminary hearing drew much interest from the media at the time and created a sensation among the public, both regionally and nationwide. The public mood was generally sympathetic to Carl, whom many viewed as an eccentric, romantic... No, you're wrong. They're very wrong. Maria Elena's body was examined by physicians and pathologists and put on public display at the Dean Lopez Funeral Home, where it was viewed by as many as 6,800 people. See, true crime fanatics, looky-loos, have always been around. Elena's body was eventually returned to the Key West Cemetery, where their remains were buried in an unmarked grave in a secret location to prevent further tampering. Thank goodness. Let that girl rest in peace, eh? While no evidence of necrophilia was presented at the 1940 preliminary hearing after Carl's arrest, two physicians who had attended the 1940 autopsy spoke about it in 1972 and claimed a tube had been inserted into the vaginal area of the corpse to allow for... Yeah. You know what? I'm not going to spell it out for you. You get it. Ugh. It's considered allegedly, but I'm going to say probably, since there were no indications that Carl had limits. In 1944, free man Carl Tanzler moved to Pasco County, close to Zephyr Hills, where he wrote an autobiography that appeared in the pulp publication Fantastic Adventures in 1947. His home was near his wife Doris, who helped to support Carl in his later years. In 1950, Carl became a U.S. citizen, so he's our creep now. I found an archive for the Fantastic Adventures magazine, so let's take a look. The tagline says, "Can the dead be brought back to life? This is the story of a scientist who believed it could be done, and did it." He wasn't a scientist. And no, he didn't. And who's this kid? Here's another illustration from the story. Carl as Dr. Frankenstein. It's very long and very fictional. I didn't read it, but I'll put a link below if you want to. Carl created a death mask, which is a wax or plaster cast of a person's face after their death. and made a life-sized effigy of Maria Elena and lived with that until his death at age 75 on July 3rd, 1952. His body was discovered on the floor of his home 3 weeks after his death. The only good news in the end here is that Carl is buried over 400 miles away from Maria Elena. That's it. That's the end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I don't know if that's the right word for this story, but now you know the story of Carl Tanzler and the story of Maria Elena. Okay, bye.